Hi BookTube, I'm here today with an original book tag, and I'm going to explain a bit about why I came up with this first. So most tags, I think, in the BookTube community tend to probably originate from the YA section of BookTube, which is understandable because it's probably the largest section of BookTube, or they are centered around a certain fandom, like the Harry Potter book tag or the Doctor Who book tag, and I'm not poo-pooing those book tags. I just wanted to create something that was a little more generic, and this generic book tag, for those reasons, is just going to be called the book tag. It's nothing fancy, just some straightforward questions. 8 of them, and let's get into them. 1. What are you currently reading? For me, I'm listening to 2 audiobooks at the moment. The Last Command by Timothy Zahn, which is the 3rd and final book in the Thrawn trilogy, which was the original Star Wars sequels before this whole stuff started happening with Disney. The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, which is the 12th book in the Wheel of Time series. Physical books, I just finished Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I'm currently reading The Clown Service by Guy Adams and Tamarend Mim by Anita Rao Badami. Yes. Number 2, when did you consciously realize you were a reader? For me, I look back in hindsight and I see that I was always a reader. It's just always something I did. I never really thought about it until in the 8th grade I got an award for the highest grade in English, and that made me look back and think, oh, I never really thought, it just came to me so naturally. I never really decided that I was a reader, and from that point forward I knew that, you know, I was going to go into English in university and make that my career goal. Number 3, what do you look for in a great book? Okay, for me, writing comes first. When an author is able to use complex sentence structures in a good way, that's what I really like. I don't really subscribe to the straightforward storytelling, either this happened, then that happened, then this happened, and the sentence structure as well, you know, subject, verb, action, you know, that kind of thing. It doesn't appeal to me. I like to see expertise in the writing style. Then next, after writing, comes the ideas presented in the book. They either got to make me think more about the context of the book or about something globally outside in real life as well. And lastly, whether the character and plot development fits within the universe that's created within the book. So I don't care if the plot or characters are believable in real life, just as long as they're believable within the book. Question 4. What are some specific books that exemplify these great qualities? And notice how I say not your favorite book, but books that exemplify what you just talked about, because sometimes your favorite book can be not what you think a great book is. If that makes sense. You could have some nostalgic value attached to it, or just pure enjoyment. So the book that I'm gonna say exemplifies this great writing and ideas and believable characters and plot is Gould's Book of Fish by Richard Flanagan. For the language, the sentence structure, I knew as soon as I read the first few pages that it was the book for me. The fascinating characters in there, which would not be at all believable in real life, but in the context of the book were so intriguing, and the stuff that was happening was just so unbelievable in real world, but really believable in the context of the book. And again, it presented ideas that were both thought-provoking and challenging for my real world life. Question 5, what disappoints you most when you encounter it in a book? As I look for good writing in good books, I look for bad writing in bad books. If the writing is bad, the characters, the plots won't keep me engaged. Yeah, and bad writing is where the author is obviously trying and not achieving it, where they try to mimic an author maybe, and they don't succeed in doing that. Pointless repetition is something I absolutely hate in books, and I will pit them down if I think that there is pointless repetition. Notice the modifier pointless. And books that rely too heavily on a gimmick, Gimmicks can work, but if you rely on that, if you rely on your plot to carry forward the book, and the writing's not there, the style's not there to accompany that, and it's not done well, then I will put down the book. So, question 6, I'm sure you can predict. What are some of the most disappointing books you have read? One, I'm gonna have to say Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I went into this thinking that I would love this book because it's all about, you know, fighting the system. But I felt that Chuck Palahniuk was actually trying too hard and he failed in quite a lot of ways. Particularly in that most of the people who admire this book don't realize that it is supposed to be a satire. And whether that's the failing of the readers or the writer, I think it still fails. And another one is Illuminae, a book that's quite popular. I think it was both a fault of the failed gimmick. It tried to be this compilation of documents, but it really didn't work. And thinking that the plot was enough to carry the book through 600 pages, it wasn't for me. Number 7, what kind of books do you gravitate towards and why? For me, that's books in an experimental format will obviously grab my attention, and whether that's done well or not. And secondly, classic science fiction. I'm talking about science fiction written 1990 and before. We won't talk about, you know, 21st century science fiction right now. That's a whole other video. Because I think that's where we see that science fiction writers were beginning to experiment, not only in form but in settings as well. And it's easier for writers to take something that's already experimental, which science fiction is. You know, we're experimenting with the future, we're experimenting with space, and to take those settings and apply experimental formatting to it. And again, I think science fiction really addresses a lot of philosophy, which I really enjoy encountering in books. Because although some people, like Margaret Atwood, believe that science fiction is all about space squids and aliens and time travel and all this, you know, awesome stuff, which is awesome, I think what science fiction is at its core is what it means to be human. Taking humanity to the edge of existence, the edge of what a person can endure, and seeing what traits come out in humanity. And it just happens to be wrapped up in adventure with a healthy dose of humor sometimes, so it's really entertaining to read as well as thought-provoking and interesting. Last question, number 8, what books do you find yourself avoiding and why? For me, I think self-help books I really tend to avoid. I think that's where a lot of bad writing is. You know, people think they have this great idea which can actually be summed up in 10 pages, but they end up bloating it with endless repetition and pointless points. Yeah, so I tend not to read any self-help books. And again, hyped books. And I've slowly come to realize that hyped books, just not for me. I think once you realize that these books are so popular and they're doing so well is because they appeal to kind of like the lowest common denominator, so that they have a wider market, and that they appeal to people who are kind of at the beginning of their reading journey, like immature readers who are not as discerning in their taste yet because they have not read as much yet. And I don't want to seem demeaning because I noticed a lot on BookTube that a lot of people are trying to move away from YA into more adult, more classical literature, into looking at, you know, things outside of tropes and love triangles and all that kind of stuff that you find in YA. I'm not discouraging YA, but yeah. So those are the books that I find myself avoiding. I put a call out on Twitter, and 2 people asked to be tagged, so I'll tag them. That's Britt at Girl on Kindlefire and Philippe at The YA Reader. And if you're interested in doing the tag, just do it. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for doing the tag. Let me know if you do it in the comments down below. And thank you for watching.